The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinician's Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative-focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Hi, welcome everybody. Excited to be back. I haven't had a show in a while. So earlier in the year, I had put out a survey asking people what they would want from the show. As I was needing to just switch some things up and not be so tethered to doing a weekly episode. It's just becoming too much and I don't want to burn myself out. But one of the things people said is they would like to have it be CE eligible. Like, could we do some podcasting where by listening at the end, you can take a quiz and then that will allow you to earn a CE credit. So this is going to be a 1 CE credit show, and it's going to be on the ethics of private practice. You would, just full disclosure, you would need to check your state and credentialing body to determine whether or not they will accept CEs offered by providers through the Florida Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Mental Health Counseling, which is how I'm offering the CEs. So you would need to do that research for yourself. I do know if you're an art therapist, the ATCB does accept those. They accept state-sponsored CEs. But if you're, trying to apply it for your state license, you would need to determine whether or not your state accepts other states. I know certain states are very persnickety and they'll only accept their state. They won't even accept like NBCC credits. So you just want to make sure to check into that. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. And so we're going to be talking about ethics in private practice. Running a private practice, you have to think about the ethics of the administration of the practice. Normally we talk about ethics as it pertains to boundaries and other client relationships, or things related to the therapeutic relationship. Today, we're going to be talking more about the administrative aspects of running a private practice ethically. So the first thing that I want to talk about is informed consent. And everybody knows what informed consent is. I think this is really important to talk about. As a clinical supervisor, I have experienced over the years where some folks have been in facilities or agencies where there's an intake person, and the intake person actually does all of the informed consent paperwork, gets everything signed in advance, then the client is passed along to the therapist. And so they're kind of removed from that process. And I think it's important that it's not just about that one time, right? Like, even though the clients may have signed the paperwork, we still need to have an initial discussion with our client about what informed consent is and what goes into it. And there's a number of things that we need to be sure we're including in that document. And it needs to be done on an ongoing basis. Like I said, yes, of course, we're going to do it at the onset of treatment, but we're going to continually talk about it as we, move forward in the therapeutic process. And it's not simply a written document that's signed, but we also need to verbally communicate that to our clients and ensure that they understand what it is that they're signing. Much of these documents include lots of legal jargon, and it can be written in such a way that it's very difficult to comprehend and understand. And we want to make sure that we're breaking it down into decipherable language that everybody can relate to and understand. We want it to be clear, and we want clients to have the opportunity to ask questions and have those questions answered about what it is that they're doing. What does it mean to be in therapy? How does the therapeutic relationship work? What are, risks and benefits? Most people, if they've never been to therapy before, they may have some idea, but if you think about the source material that we get as the public, in movies and television and, books and stuff, oftentimes the therapeutic relationship is not, uh, it's not broadcast in an ethical light, right? A lot of what we see on TV and movies is for drama. There's lots of drama and there's lots of unethical stuff going on. So we really need to be sure that we're communicating what does it mean, right? So some things at a minimum to be included in your informed consent are an explanation of your services, along with any potential issues that should arise or could arise, right? And that might be, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of treatment? What are the goals of treatment? How do we work together to create goals in therapy? What specific techniques, if you're using a specific modality, what what are the techniques? How does it work? What are potential risks to that modality or concerns related to that modality? So, for example, if you're doing some form of like trauma reprocessing therapy, there could be potential risks of, you know, feeling exhausted afterwards, having intense dreams related to the traumatic material that the brain and body are now going to be reprocessing. We need to be able to communicate that so that the client knows what to expect. Limitations, right? Like, well, we're going to attempt to do this in hopes that it's going to be beneficial and helpful, but it may not be, right? Everyone responds differently to different treatment approaches. There's not a one size fits all. And there's also a limitation if the client just comes each week and they meet with you for their hour, or maybe it's an hour and 15 minutes, depending upon your practice, whatever it may be. And then they don't do anything on their own time. Well, that's going to be a limitation because they're not actually putting what they're learning into action. And therefore, it's going to be very, very, uh, it's going to take a long time before change occurs because they're not putting it in practice. We also need to be sure that we're disclosing our qualifications and credentials. What's our relevant experience? Do we have experience within the scope to adequately address their needs, right? Should we be looking at referring out if we don't, right? That would be important to talk with them about. What's our approach to therapy? What are other approaches to therapy that may be beneficial to them? We also need to have a clause in there about how a client would continue services upon our incapacitation or death. And that's going to be addressed in a business will, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the hour. And that's something that I think comes as a shock to a lot of people. A lot of people don't realize that we need to do that. And if you read your state's laws and rules pertaining to practice, there's probably something written in there as well, in addition to being in the codes of ethics. Many legal statutes also say that we have to have this. So if you don't have this, that's okay. We'll talk about how to create it and what needs to go in it later. And if you do decide to purchase the CE for this podcast, which I'll give you the link to that at the very end, along with being able to take a short quiz about the content and getting your certificate of completion, you'll also have access to a little portal where there will be a spreadsheet for you to download that includes all of the things that you're going to need for your business will, to have the person that's going to be taking care of things have access to everything that they need. So I've organized that for you all. We also need to talk about the role of technology. Many of us are working using technology, using telehealth services. We're not just meeting face to face anymore. And our clients need to understand how that's going to work, the limits of that, the potential pitfalls to confidentiality related to technology, right? Even sending messages via email or sending messages via text. When I first started, it was rare, rare to think that a client would text you. Texting wasn't really that big then, but now it's so such a part of our everyday life that clients do want to text. They text our office line. And just like a side caveat, there was a new law that went into place that requires us to have additional policies for managing SMS text communication. And we can talk about that another time, but that means we have to have appropriate disclosures and a way for clients to sign in to receiving text messages or to discontinue receiving text messages. And that's important if you're using an electronic health record. You would need to set all of that up. Okay. We also need to include our fees for services and our policy and procedures of what happens if the client doesn't pay for those services. What happens if you accept a check and the check bounces? Right? Do you have a check fee? Do you have a fee for late canceling or no shows? Do you charge your full price for that session, or do you charge a fee, $25 fee or $50 fee? Whatever it is that you do related to charging needs to be included in your informed consent. And that includes if you do opt for using some kind of collection service for any unpaid balances. That would also need to be included in your informed consent. Now, again, many people are using telehealth. And so we have to adopt a telehealth informed consent as well. And that's going to go above and beyond your traditional informed consent. And it's going to talk specifically about the risks and benefits to engaging in telehealth services. And some things that are very important to include is what are you going to do in the event of a technical failure? You want to make sure that you have instructions in there telling your client how you're going to provide access to video conferencing, however you do it. Maybe it's through your EHR. Maybe you have a DocsMe account or a secure video account, something that's HIPAA compliant. What happens if that is down and doesn't work, right? Because that does happen. I know just a few weeks ago, Zoom went out, and it went out for a variety of folks, because I know I couldn't access it in a variety of ways, and I heard from other people too. So, okay, what happens when the technology fails? What's the backup plan? Do you have an alternative method of service delivery? Are you going to call them on the phone? Are you going to send them an email with additional instructions for a different backup video platform? I have two. I have the one that's offered through my EHR, which is Jane app. And so we can meet there. But if we're having technical issues there, I have a DocsMe account. And if you've not used DocsMe, it's been around since before COVID. I started using it in 2015, actually. And it's free for a basic account. If you want to pay more, you get it some additional features, but I find it works great for individual telehealth, and it's not an additional expense, which is nice. And so that's outlined in the telehealth informed consent. So however you want to manage that, that needs to be in there. You also want to include any anticipated response time if a client reaches out to you in between sessions. How long is it going to take you to get back to them? What's your policy and procedure around that? Are you accessible? I know for me, one thing that I include in the informed consent is do not contact me via email in the event of an emergency. And if it is an emergency, you really need to call 911 or your local, first responder, because I can't guarantee that I'm going to be available when you call or email. And I just don't have enough time sometimes to make it through, wade through all the emails that come in. And sometimes things get lost in the inbox. I don't want anybody sending emergency requests for help via email. So what are your emergency procedures? What do you want them to follow if you're not available? Right? That should be included in there. How you're going to address any time zone differences. It may be that that doesn't represent a challenge or a problem. But in my state, in Florida, we have 2 time zones within the state. And so it would be possible to have a client in a different time zone than you. And you want to be able to make sure that there's clear communication about what time zone you're using to schedule appointments. You also need to have a disclosure about the potential denial of insurance benefits when using telehealth services. I think this may have been more of a concern prior to COVID, when many insurance companies did not allow for telehealth reimbursement, but that did change. I think maybe some of them have reverted or changed some, policies around that, but you want to be sure that that is included. And then what's your social media policy? You want to be sure to have a nice, clear social media policy about why you're not able to engage with clients online, that you might have a business account that they can follow, but you will not be friending a client, that they shouldn't make attempts to communicate to you using social media messaging applications because of the potential of breach of confidentiality, and where to reach you instead. That should be clearly outlined. A lot of times people don't realize, right? The public doesn't realize, oh, I'm putting myself at risk here for communicating via social media or communicating on social media. Now, we can't stop people from commenting and things like that, but we certainly can't respond, because to respond, then that could be a confirmation. And again, we have to protect the client's confidentiality. So those are some things that need to be included in your telehealth informed consent. There could be more as well. There are going to be times when we have to terminate our relationship with a client, and there are some reasons that we might need to do that. Always when a client's concern or issues fall outside of our scope of practice or training, then we're going to want to refer out. I needed to take a little drink of water. We'll want to refer out. Now, sometimes we might have some training, we might have limited training, and maybe it makes sense not to terminate, and it makes sense to receive some additional training around that issue, or to receive some consultation or supervision with another trained professional to help us adequately provide and ethically provide care. Some other reasons that we might ethically terminate services: when our client is no longer likely to benefit from the services offered, right? Or perhaps if the services, are likely to cause harm in some way, then we definitely want to refer out. Now, another thing that we don't often talk about is when the counselor might be in jeopardy of harm by the client or another person with whom the client has a relationship. Now, if you've worked in certain settings that are high, like have a higher risk for abuse, that you're seeing clients that have experienced some kind of abuse, or power differential in the relationships. I'm thinking like working in a domestic violence shelter, working with clients who child victims of abuse, for example, children whose parents are in a high conflict divorce type situation, and maybe as a result of abuse, where the therapist might be receiving threats from that other person. And this does happen. It happens more frequently, I think, than it's talked about in the field, but it's something that we need to be aware of to protect ourselves, because if something happens to us, then that's going to impact the quality of care for all the other clients in our caseload. So if you do have that occur, it would be important to reach out and get a legal consult on what the appropriate actions you are able to take to protect yourself from harm. There are unfortunate circumstances where therapists are stalked, where they're retaliated against for calling the Department of Children and Families or the Department of Protective Services, Child Protective Services, whatever it is in your area, where there's retaliatory action for that could come down on the therapist. And so consulting with a legal representative about what your rights are to be able to respond and handle that appropriately and put what kind of protections you can put in place for yourself would be important. But you are able to ethically terminate in those circumstances. And I just feel that it's really important to communicate that, because sometimes we might feel obligated to continue to work with a particular person. That might be still your choice. You could still choose to do that, but you do have the ability to terminate in those situations. And if you're not familiar, most of your liability insurance policies will allow for a legal consult with no fee or no negative ramification on your account. So that would be my recommendation, because sometimes you might need to get a restraining order, or some other things might need to be put in place to protect your identity. For example, having your physical property name and address removed from public record. How do you get that done? We do have the ability to do that, but it is a process. So having that legal consult can really help in that situation. The other time where it is ethically appropriate to terminate is when the client doesn't pay the fees for services rendered. When they have not paid, it is appropriate to terminate. Now, one thing we want to consider when we do terminate services is if we're referring out for things like the client's not paying fees, it's a scope of practice issue. Maybe it's not a good therapeutic alliance, right? Maybe it's not a good fit. That might be something we also talk about in the informed consent policy and let them know, hey, therapy is about the relationship between the two people. And if you don't feel that I'm the right person for you, that's totally okay. It's better that we find somebody that you're going to jam with and connect with, because the work really happens through the relationship. And if you don't feel that I'm the right person and you don't feel comfortable, then it's not going to be of benefit, right? And in those situations, we want to make sure that we are able to provide them with some kind of referral for some other options, right? So other options in your area, provide a few referrals for folks that might be a better fit and able to help them. Now, something that's been coming up a lot lately when I've talked with other therapists, and other therapists have asked about this, is it okay to have a client leave a review on Google, let's say, or review on some, maybe Facebook, like your Facebook business page or something? Across the board, the ethical codes for our different mental health professions all say, to some greater or lesser degree, we don't endanger our clients, we don't exploit our clients, and we don't solicit testimonials from our clients. This may also be one of those things that is explicitly expressed in the laws that govern your license in your state as well. I know it is here in Florida. It is not legal to solicit testimonials from clients. And what I've encountered is when I've worked with other companies to help with like marketing or working on SEO for my website so that my listing and website comes up on the first page of Google when people are looking for mental health services in my community, right? I want to make sure that my search engine optimization is doing its job with the content. And one of the things that's come up recently is that one of the tools that Google is using to evaluate the SEO is how many reviews and testimonials people have on their Google business listing and how frequently they're obtaining new reviews. Okay. Well, that puts us in private practice in a really sticky situation because we can't ask our clients to leave a review. Now, we can't stop them if they were to choose to do that, but we're not allowed to specifically ask them. So I've seen some people have it in their email signature. You don't want to do that, even though your email could be going out to a whole variety of people. It's also could be going out to your clients, and that could be considered solicitation if you're requesting people to leave reviews. Not with a QR code that's posted in your office, right? Also seen that. Or like a card, like leave us a review. That is solicitation. You're encouraging your client to do that, and that's not ethical, and it potentially could not be legal as well, depending upon what your state governance is for your profession, your license, and not by verbal request. And the reason is that there's always going to be a power imbalance in the therapeutic relationship. We, as the therapists, hold the power. And think about what we know about transferential dynamics, right? Where the client may bestow high appraisal for the therapist and might really want to please them in some way, and they would agree to writing a review. But that is using our power in the relationship in a way that isn't right. Because what happens if you ask for somebody to write a review, and that's great, but later on in the therapeutic relationship, something happens and they feel disgruntled or dissatisfied, then what? Right? It could also become a potential breach of confidentiality. Because if we're asking somebody to publicly post somewhere a testimonial, then that is exposing them as a client. And that, again, breaks confidentiality. So we don't necessarily want to do that for a variety of reasons. And of course, it's like a potential exploitation of the client relationship. And in a way, we're exerting undue influence on the client. Now, some codes of ethics will say no testimonials, but if you do, you need to have a release of information signed, right? Some kind of consent form signed that they've agreed to this, they understand. And this is probably like maybe you're doing something for a piece of literature, let's say. Maybe you're doing something educational. And but we still, if we're going to do that, we have to make sure that we are protecting the client's confidentiality. So that might be asking them to select a pseudonym or use some initials if there's going to be some disclosure. But again, I really think that we should avoid doing this. I, over the years, have had issues where different media have reached out to me and like invited me, say, to be on like a radio interview, for example. And in order to do that, they wanted me to bring clients with me so that we could have a conversation together and the client could provide their, um, you know, expression of their experience, right? They could speak to how art therapy has been effective. And I refuse to do that. One, because I didn't feel comfortable asking a client to do that. And because of the power imbalance, but also because that is like exposing them. And we may not realize, like, right now, it may not be a problem, but maybe later on it is a problem because we don't know what's going to happen far into the future. And I especially think about that with like kids, where different agencies and the marketing departments are completely different from the rules that govern what we do, and they have an idea, and I understand their idea and why they want to do it, but it potentially could cause harm to the client. So yes, maybe a parent gives consent and the child gives assent to be featured in a commercial or something, or in some piece of literature on the website, right? Well, at that point, the child doesn't have the legal ability to understand what the potential harm could come of that later on, which is why they have to give assent, not consent. They can't consent. The parent is the one consenting at that time. And so it's those kinds of things that we really need to be mindful of when we're creating our own practice and ensuring that our policy and procedures align with these ethical codes of conduct. And perhaps maybe it's even a personal value system, right? Like that for me, I don't feel comfortable doing that for those reasons. And even like years ago, I was contacted by a news person for the paper, and they wanted to come in and videography a therapy group. They wanted to come in and video an art therapy group and write a piece, but the video would be featured on the website of the news show or the newspaper, excuse me. And that created a lot of anxiety because these were elders, some of them in an area of cognitive decline. And again, it felt like, one, it felt super intrusive, but two, it's a total breach of confidentiality. And even though it might provide exposure for what was happening in this particular agency where I was providing the group, and how it was benefiting those folks, I didn't feel comfortable with that. And the news person became really hostile with me about it. And I was like, that's fine. If you're going to try to strong arm me, I'm happy to not have the article written at all. So thank you for your interest, and we'll just go our separate ways, because we weren't able to come to and understanding around why this was not okay. But again, people outside of our field have their agenda, and they may not understand that these are issues with ethical importance. So, what we can do instead, if we want testimonials, and as I was saying earlier, if you have a website and you're trying to remain relevant and really be on that first page of Google or the first page of the search engine when people are looking, you are going to want testimonials, but who you ask needs to be different. So instead of asking your clients, ask colleagues which you've collaborated with. Ask them to write a Google review for you and speak to your expertise and, like what people can expect. And they can speak to what you do well. Ask readers of your blog, for example. Ask people that have attended trainings or workshops that you facilitated. We teach in the practice a variety of CE courses that are required for licensure renewal, or we teach a course here in Florida to become a qualified supervisor for licensed clinical social work, marriage and family therapy, and mental health counselor. So we teach that training. And so what we do is we ask people who've attended those trainings, they're other professionals, they're not our clients, if they would be willing to provide an attestation for us and provide the link. This way we do get some testimonials there online, but we're not, exerting undue influence over clients. So those are some options if you really want to get testimonials that would be a better source. So lastly, as we round out the hour, I want to talk to you about a business will. So I've talked with a lot of people over the years that they don't realize that they need a business will. And I didn't at first either. I'll admit that. I didn't at first either. I learned it probably within my first year of opening my practice. I learned about it and I was like, oh my gosh, I had been researching. I'd done a ton of research on what I needed to do. And this was something that hadn't crossed my path. But what your business will is it's a legal document that entrusts a custodian of records or a custodian of your practice, otherwise known as a professional executor, with policies, procedures for managing communication to clients, managing client records, managing and storage of client records, how the clients would need to obtain those records in the future, and closing your practice. What are the things that need to happen if you're to close your practice in the event of incapacitation or death? Now, this is something that nobody wants to talk about because, who wants to face their own mortality, right? Like, it's not something that we really think about. Like, oh, I'm going to age. I'm going to live until, the average age of like 80 something. By then I won't have a practice anymore. It'll be shut down. But, we don't know. We don't know when our day is going to be called. So we have to prepare for this. Now, this is another one that not only is it in our codes of ethics, but there's a strong likelihood that it may be in your laws and rules for your state licensure credential as well. So that's something that you should look into. I know that it is here. So what needs to be included in this? Well, you're going to want to make sure that it includes contact information of people that will aid the person, the executor, to access important files, passwords, and any other information that's necessary to operate, manage, and or close your practice for you. So that's going to include your passwords to everything, your passwords to your electronic health record and other technology used to run your practice. It could be maybe you use a password manager application. Like then that would be in there. Which password manager application do you use? What's your username and password for that? Now, the other thing to consider here is currently many of these tools require additional verification, right? And what do we use for the additional verification? Probably our telephone, right? They'll text us some kind of code. And so that's why the contact information of people that can help that executor needs to be included, because they're probably going to need to have access to your phone in order to manage all of the technology associated with running your practice. So you want to include that. You want to include your email for, if you don't have a password management application, which some people might not, you want to make sure that you have like a spreadsheet with, your email. What's your email name? What's the username, password? Do you use a voice over internet protocol system for your phones and fax? If so, what is it? What's the website? What are the username and passwords for that? Do you have an external hard drive that you back up your digital records on? What are the passwords to get into that? Where is it stored? Where's the key to the locked cabinet that it's stored in? Who has that? And then, of course, passwords to things like your social media, any accounting software that you use. If you're using something like QuickBooks or Wave or, goodness gracious, could be something like an online HR platform that helps you pay the other therapist in your practice. All of that needs to be included in here. If you have been in business a long time, you may have a storage unit with filing cabinets with old records in them, because that is what people used to do before digital electronic health records became more accessible and affordable for us to utilize. People would keep their paper documents, their paper files, and put them in filing cabinets in a storage facility. If they've been in business a long time, you might end up having a lot of records. So the executor is going to need to know where that storage facility is, what keys go to what filing cabinets. So all of that's going to need to be written down and included in there. Your financial institution. So this part's important, right? When you have business banking, the business banking is directly related to your business account that's set up with the state, and you have to prove that. So you would need to include in the will that this person is to be given access, and they're going to need to have to produce that at the bank in order to access those accounts. And they're probably going to need that because they're going to need to pay out outstanding bills. They're going to need to, reconcile any additional incoming payments that are coming through insurance and service accounts that you have, and your username and password to access those accounts. And as I said before, that's going to include other accounting programs that you might use, not just your bank, but it could be QuickBooks, or I use something called Wave Accounting. So they're going to need that information as well. It could be credit card accounts. Maybe you have credit card accounts that are going to need to be shut down as well that are operating under your business's name. That information is going to need to be in there. And then your tax professional contact information. They're going to need to be able to reach out to that person and let them know what's happening, because they might be doing your quarterly taxes for you, and they need to know that something's happened. You're no longer able to run your business, and they're going to have to do final tax preparation. And then, of course, instructions on how you want your business to be closed. What are the specifics that you want them to tell your clients, right? This is going to outline, how they're going to be able to access their records in the future, should they want them. It's going to include who are you referring them to in, who are you going to refer your clients to after you're no longer able to see them because you're not around, right? They need to have that information to relay to them, along with all the other administrative process of things. Then, of course, the business tax information. So your state division of corporations, how do they need to go about shutting that down and notifying the state? The county, if you have a tax license to operate your practice via your county, and your city. Depending upon where you're located, it could be state and county, or it could be all three. And then instructions on how to close those accounts with each entity. You also want to be sure that included in this document is the information about your liability insurance. And that's going to be the contact information for the liability policy, the policy number, and how to access it, and how they're going to need to notify the insurance company at the very end, once you've closed everything, right? Once they've closed everything and taken care of everything, at that point, they can terminate the policy. Now, this isn't a matter of ethics per se, but if you're going to have an executor do all this, you can just imagine, just by what I've been talking about, the amount of hours that is going to be necessary to close your practice. This isn't going to be a simple, let me make a few phone calls and I'm done kind of situation. There's a lot that's going to go into it, because it's not just about managing your client records. Yes, that's really important. But it's also about all the other administrative pieces, taking care of making sure that all the bills are paid and all the money that is supposed to be coming into the business has made it in before those banking accounts get shut down. It's going to be notifying your landlord. It's going to be dispersing of all of the equipment and furnishings in your physical location, if you're working out of a physical location of your practice. There's just so much that goes into it. And you might consider taking out a life insurance policy on yourself and having that designated to your executor, so that you can pay them if something does happen and it's not coming out of, the practice funds directly, but there's a secure amount of funds to be able to help them out while they're closing your business. Now, a lot of times when I've seen written about this and when I've talked to other people, is the recommendation is that you ask this of another colleague. Now, I like that idea because they're in the business and you could be like each other's backup. However, I also think that if they're operating their own business and practice, to do that and to come in and do this might be represent a significant amount of work. And you might, depending upon how you structure your business, it might be your spouse that does everything. It's going to be a lot easier considering the legal connection in terms of like finances and things like that. But also with like life insurance policy, even though they may not be working in your practice, they're supporting you in building your practice, and they have an investment in your success. Not to say that a colleague wouldn't, but I think it's just a big ask. It's something that you have to consider for yourself, what's going to be best. But it's an important part of what we need to do. And all of those instructions that we leave have to be updated and maintained because your practice is going to change and grow and evolve as you are in business, and those passwords are going to change. So making sure that you have a system to keep all of that stuff updated is really important too. If you decide to take this, the quiz for this, which will ask a few questions about the different topics that we talked about pertaining to ethics in private practice, you'll get access to a spreadsheet that will allow you to keep all of that information for the business will in an orderly place. And this way, that would be attached to your business will so that your executor has all of that information in an organized fashion, all in one spot, which is going to make their life a lot easier. Because could you imagine if you didn't have all that information in an organized place, how difficult it would be for the person to shut it down? And I know people don't like to think about it, but I have heard from numerous people over the course of my career whose therapists have died unexpectedly. And then the aftermath, it's messy. Sometimes the client doesn't hear from anybody for months. They have no idea. It's like the therapist just disappeared off the face of the planet, right? And that's because there wasn't appropriate instructions left for what to do. So we may not want to think about it. It may feel really uncomfortable, but it is really important. And finally, if you do want to take the CEs, it's $10 for the one CE. You would need to go to FloridaArtTherapyServices.groovepages.com/ethics-on-demand. And that will take you to the registration page. You can pay for it there. You'll get an access to a little portal. That spreadsheet will be in there for you to download and save for yourself. And then the link to the quiz and evaluation of your experience will be in Class Marker, and you'll take the short quiz. I think it might be 9 or 10 questions. It's really simple. And then you'll be able to download a certificate of completion right from there. And if you have any challenges with that, you can always email me, Reina, REINA, at floridaarttherapyservices.com or creativeclinician@gmail.com. Either way, we'll be sure to make sure that you get what you need. If you are a Florida licensed person, I'll enter that information in CEBroker for you. But if not, you'll need to just download that certificate of completion and then share that with your credentialing body or licensing body. But as I said at the beginning of the show, just for pure disclosure, my practice, Florida Art Therapy Services, is a provider for continuing education for the Florida Board of Licensed Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Mental Health Counseling. And you need to determine whether or not your state licensing body and credentialing body accept those for CEs. So you'll need to do a little diligence there. I'm still evaluating whether or not I will pursue something like an NBCC provider status. It's a little more rigorous and expensive to do that. I'm kind of see what happens. For right now, it's just the board. I know if you're an art therapist listening, the ATCB will accept these as credits, but I can't speak to any of the other modalities and their credentialing bodies of what they will accept for CEs. But I'm grateful for you listening today, and let me know if this was helpful. If you have any questions, send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you think of, this would be a great resource, do you have this? Email me and let me know. And if I have it, I can share it. If not, it might be something worth developing for others to use too. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. And I hope you found it valuable. If you feel comfortable, please rate, review, subscribe to us on YouTube, which is the Creative Psychotherapist 6240, or on Instagram at Creative Clinicians Corner, and wherever you listen to the podcast. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.